This is the ZMAR Podcast. Elite Benefits of America helps small and mid-sized companies with their health insurance programs. And now, your host, Butch ZMAR.
More productivity starts with you. So we'll talk about beer league hockey. I didn't grow up playing hockey. I got into it because my boys started skating, and then we started going to rat hockey. And then over time, eventually, one of the other parents are like, hey, we need a sub for our game. We're short players. And I'm like, the first time was like, I don't have all the gear. So I slowly picked up the gear, and I was asked again, came out. And of course, I was nervous actually playing in a hockey game, right? Instead of just rat hockey, there was refs and scoreboard and teammates on the bench, right? Definitely a lower level player. Today, fast forward, been doing it 7-8 years, and I would say a lot better, but still on the lower end of things. When I first started, I was wondering if I should even be there, right? And there's many beer league hockey players that probably shouldn't be there, but who cares? It's just for the fun and obviously the beers. And then a lot of spouses get aggravated because most of the games start at 10:30 at night, and they're in the summer months at least. They're out until 1-2 o'clock in the morning before they get home. I stopped doing that early on, but it's definitely about all the fun. But the games were definitely fun. I learned on the fly. The teams don't practice. We just show up for games, which is fine in itself. Everybody's busy. They got their own kids' schedules or just their own lives, and there's no time to add in extras. We just go have fun, play a game, go home. And I learned from the coaches that my kids were having, but also I learned from the friends that were on the bench. Some of them played when they were growing up. Some of them played when they were growing up and coached, or some combination thereof. But there was definitely people with a little bit more experience and knowledge than me to help move things along. But you definitely start getting a perspective or respect for when your kids are playing, especially when you miss the puck and then you see your kid miss the puck and you're like, well, I know I done that, right? Or you miss the hockey stop to turn back to the other direction, or you miss the timing of something and you're sitting there from the stands, cringing because that's your kid that just messed up. But when you're out there and it happens to you, you gain a different perspective of it. And it could also be just a hard time putting it. Sometimes when you're on a steel blade, a single steel blade, and you're on ice, which is obviously slippery, and you have all these angles, right? There's so much physics that come to the game of hockey, and sometimes certain things just don't line up correctly, right? You just can't get the stick into a certain spot when you're in a board battle, or you can't move your skates in a certain direction just because the way you're positioned in a board battle, or when you're, fighting with somebody for the puck, you're grinding it out, bumping into each other, maybe even pressing against a board or another body, and you just can't get that angle. But you could see it from the stands, right? Because, the people, parents in the stands could see a lot of things in a different perspective. When you're in the game, though, it changes because now it's real life, and you could see why sometimes there's missteps. But you get to enjoy the game more. You play it, and you start to wonder why it's a lifelong sport and why people love it so much. And this will happen with any sport, but when you're in the game, it's like a little club, a little niche. When you're in it, you enjoy it more, and it becomes like one of your greatest sports you ever played. I'm sure that'll be for any sport, but with hockey, the biggest thing is just keep moving your feet. But at some point, when I got a little bit better at the game of hockey, I felt like I could push harder, right? Grind it out, push it really hard for my shift, do my part, right? And I would go out there and just give it more of my all as I was getting better, and I would come off just even more exhausted than ever before on the bench. And then the next shift, I would just push even harder and see what kind of results I would come with. And then the next one and the next one, just trying to push to a different level. And in some ways, it did help, because that's what we tell our kids all the time. You got to push, and sometimes if you don't push yourself hard enough, you'll never see the light of it. But at some point during all my pushing and trying to get better, all of a sudden you hear a yell from the bench, while I'm sitting there grinding it out for my time on the ice for the game. They yell out, "Butch, you're out of position. Play your position." Right. And so when I get off the ice, the teammate on the bench, I still remember it, and he often reminds me of this over time too. But he's a seasoned hockey player. He's a coach. He's been around a long time in the south side of Chicago here. And he was just like, "Butch, you're playing out of position. You're working too hard because you're out of position. You need to get back into position, and you'll be more productive." And it's still 8 years later playing this game, and I'm still getting yelled at from the bench, especially from this guy. But I could see in the kids too, even though we all get better and we're all trying to work it hard, but sometimes when we're out of position, it just doesn't work like you think it does, right? You think you're grinding it out, you're working harder, just try to do your part for the team and help out. And in some cases, you're really trying to grind it, and you could tell. Even with now they have videos, you can go back and see the effort that's there, right? But even kids that have been playing, teenagers that have been playing 10, 15 years at this point, right? They feel the need to keep grinding it out. The harder they work harder, they feel like they'll just overwork and they'll gain the results, especially their youthism that's behind them, the strength that they have. And then in the end, you waste a lot of time and energy, right? And so there's very little results or no results in a lot of cases for the effort that you're actually putting in. It's almost like a complete waste of time. And a lot of kids, you'll see this, and then eventually you could see that they start giving up. And it's one of the contributors, not the main reason. There's a big drop off when they're high school kids because they find other things because it's less exhausting, right? So for most teams, a beer league or otherwise, business too, you will in fact become scoreless at some point if you have a team that feels like they're working really hard, but they're out of position and they're not taking leverage to the best advantage. They grind, they work hard, but they still produce little to no results. Occasionally, you'll squeak out a goal, right? In hockey or any sport, you finally score, right? Or in business, you might grab enough revenue to make it the next week, the next month, the next year, right? You just enough to keep going. And occasionally, you win the big game, right? You'll land a big deal. You'll beat a tough team. You'll squeak it out 1-0. You'll still win, right? It happens, right? You work hard enough, it'll happen. But all you're doing is you're working your way to a heart attack, whether it's on the ice, being old age in a beer league, sure, there's youthism and there's not going to be heart attacks, but you're going to totally exhaust yourself. But in the workplace, you'll find a lot of people that just overwork themselves. The productivity is down, but they're trying to gain up for it in effort, and it never pans out. And then that's when you hear some people end up in the hospital because they're overworked. But usually, if you look at production, at the same time, they're not producing more; they're producing less. So definitely listen up, salespeople, business owners, executives, board of directors, even janitors out there. And anyone listening to this podcast, right? And hopefully my boys one day will listen to this and take some advice, right? You definitely need to play your position and look for leverage, right? Execute a process. So in business, it's more of a process that you have to work through. And the results will be a lot more rewarding, and you could actually make them more predictable. Same thing when we talk about benefit plans, right? It's about using leverage and having more predictable outcomes. When you don't use the leverage, you're working hard and all you do is complain about the renewal process and you get nowhere. And it's the same thing on productive results. And all you see is more increase in that case. But when you start leveraging things, you actually may end up producing a wave, and that's when the grind comes in. You start pushing harder and you could see the wave and the outcomes escalate so fast because you're using that leverage or that process. So back in my scuba days, I was in my early 20s and I was working on the scuba regulator. We did some service on maintenance on equipment, and so I had to take my rotation. I guess you could say I worked the sales floor, taught classes, and then worked on repairs. It was kind of like a jack of all trades because they're all small businesses. And so we're working on this first stage regulator. First stage regulator goes on top of the tank, and there was a port plug that was on the inside of it, and I think it was called something else, but I'm just going to call it. It was like a plug, and so I had to unscrew the plug, and I'm sitting there pushing hard, pulling hard, whatever you want to call it. We had it in a vice grip, all kinds of stuff, and I'm just muscling it, figuring I'm this young whippersnapper with a little bit of strength, and I'm just going to muscle this thing. So eventually I ended up stripping it out and damaging the inside of it to a certain degree. It was all fixable, like brand new now, and everything went out the door just fine. It tested fine. But I scored something, or whatever it was. I don't remember. This is going back potentially 20 years ago, but I definitely did some damage on it. I had to get another senior guy to help me fix it. He showed me some things. He had mentioned something that resonates with me for the rest of my life, right? And he was a great mentor overall, big experience, a lot of experiences. It was his second career. He was already retired. He was doing it basically to help fund his retirement planning. And so they did a lot of scuba trips with him and his wife, and that was what he did. And he enjoyed it, and he had a lot of fun. It was one of those things where he didn't have to show up to work because he didn't need the money, but he enjoyed being there. But he had mentioned to me that if you ever have to force anything, you should stop and reevaluate. It is super rare that you ever have to actually use your hardcore muscles to open up or do anything. And in most of the cases, you certainly don't have to be, that superhuman Thor with his hammer and really going after something to try to get things to come loose, right? And same thing happens in real life. It's about leverage that helps opportunities become more smoother, and you could produce more results. And here in that regulator that I was just talking about, we wasted a bunch of time trying to fix it. And so I lost productivity at the same time of trying to overpower something. And just like if the example we gave on the ice, where I'm grinding it out and working hard, but I'm out of position, so there's no leverage. I can't do anything. And most of the time in business too, that in sales, the sales process, right? And so, if you're not using the right tool or using it in a right way for a leverage, like you can't use a screwdriver that should be used, you should be using a hammer, right? You're not going to get the results in the process. So don't get me wrong, even if we go back to talking about hockey players, these young athletes, right, they need strength and everything. We need strength as men and people in general. I joke with my kids, where's your man muscles, right? Like, we need strength, right? These athletes with hockey, you have these strong board battles, right? You have to muscle them. You have to be strong with the sticks and steal those pucks, right? And there's a lot of reason for strength, right? But it's about using that strength to the right ability with leverage that really produces bigger outcomes. You have to use a leverage. So that whole big phrase that when you give me a lever long enough, I can move the world, right? And so it's same is true with all aspects of life. I got this buddy in beer league. He's a great guy. We got kids around the same age. We're on different teams now, but we run into each other at ice rinks randomly. His name is Mike. He's a terrible skater. Great athlete, played college baseball, did all kinds of sports. He's a great athlete. Even in his age of drinking beer and raising kids, he's still a great athlete. And so, but he knows that he's a terrible skater. The team knows he's a terrible skater, but he gets invited all the time. One, he's a lot of fun, and that makes up all the difference anyways. But he's a very, very smart hockey player, and it comes from his athletic days, for sure. And so, even though he's a terrible skater, he's usually every season, so they're broken apart, 2-3 seasons a year for the beer league, depending on what club you're with. He's usually the number 1 or number 2 goal scorer on the team. Usually both the goals and the assists, not just the goals, right? You could park in front of the net and eventually goals will go in. That's part of it. But he gets a lot of assists too, and he's up there with number 1, number 2 with those, right? And some would say, come on, Butch, he's a terrible skater. How in the world does he get points? I know it's hard because, just the same theory of, well, if I'm a good skater, I should be able to skate really hard and I should be able to get results. And that doesn't become true. But how do you take a terrible skater and get results, right? Because he plays his position. He uses leverage. He actually figures out a way to adapt, knowing that he's not a really good skater. and he tries to predict outcomes where the puck's going to go. And he actually does a fair good job. I'm not saying that he's a genius and he could predict the future, but when you play enough games and you have enough, they call it hockey sensing, but you could call it sports sensing. But it's the same thing when you're driving, when you're trying to predict outcomes of other cars so you could avoid car accidents. It's the same concept. But so he's predicting these outcomes and put them in a position that he can pass it to somebody else and that he's already aware of where the position is. Or figure out a way to put it on net and pucks go in when you put enough pucks in, or put enough pucks on net. Eventually one's going to go in, or two or three. You just got to put it there. And then all of a sudden we're on the scoreboard. And usually the teams that we're on were a bunch of hockey dads. More than half the team never played the game prior to being an adult. And I tell you, any score on a scoreboard is awesome. And we're usually one of the bottom ones in the league, and that's okay, right? Like, we know our place. Some of the teams we play against, they get aggravated that we're playing them, but they should move to a different bracket that's more competitive for them. But we have a lot of fun. I always say, if you're other hockey players listening to this, just don't be a jerk on the ice. We're just there having fun as well. But the same is true in life and business. Truth be told, many salespeople are just straight up lazy. Most of the salespeople I've ever met, whether it's industry or out, they're just straight up lazy. They do the numbers mathematically to figure out how to keep their job. We've seen this in my industry too, where they'll become an employee of an agency and they'll sell enough to barely stumble along, and every 3 to 7 years they're switching to another agency. And you figure you switch to 2 or 3 in your career, and then you're able to retire at some point. But it's unfortunate, but it's just the way it goes, right? But there's others that they go out there and they really work hard, but they underperform. Especially for the effort they're putting in, they should, you feel bad for them, that the amount of effort they're actually putting in this and there's no results. I know many people, there's this one guy, he was on the podcast too, he's a great connector. When he was in a different industry, he went back to his original industry to get more results because he knew it better. But he traded industries because of he moved or something. But he had a bunch of connections. He worked really hard, put on a bunch of events, got people in a room. I don't know too many people that don't know him in the Chicagoland area. He just couldn't produce results. He just couldn't figure it out. And he thought at some point there would be a tipping point. And so you feel bad for the effort that he puts in, because he definitely puts in the effort to try to produce results. It just wasn't working. He switched industries. He's doing better now. I'm not sure what really transpired there, but still, you can noticeably see people really working hard, making the phone calls, going out and doing the visits, but they're not getting the results. I'm included in this, right? But what's interesting is every time I've tried to make a decision to try to be more effective, maybe use a process a little bit more to my advantage for the results, I actually do gain more time and I get more results. And I've tested that over and over. And then human nature comes in, right? It's still a learning curve. I call it a hustle muscle, right? You have to work the muscle just like everything else. And once you get through a learning curve and you have this muscle, you can leverage things a little bit more. And so that's where the strength comes in, right? And so same goes with any other sports, right? But the problem is we're human natures and we always lean towards easy. So what I have learned is that you always end up developing bad habits when you have essentially white space in the calendar, is just one way to put it. Or when you create more time for yourself, it fills with something else. It's a opposite version of Parkinson's law. And so a lot of times what happens, you produce or you leverage things to produce more, and it makes more time for you. And then all of a sudden that extra time gets filled with garbage or time suck activities, business related or non-business related, instead of productivity when you're putting it in that spot. That's why some of these, big time celebrities that own businesses or just business owners in general, they're maximizing that time, but they've produced leverages in between them, allow them to be in that position. When you're in startup mode or in growing a company, you don't have the same type of leverage. So you have to figure out small little pieces, small little wins along the way that produce more leverage to keep going. It takes a lot of practice to get better at it, but eventually you could pick up things faster and you could drop things faster. So when you build see better, more mistakes going on, you could actually pull back and start all over again and gain ground faster as you gain more experience. But you need to practice this every day. And in business, it may be every hour and restarting everything to make sure you stay on track. Even in sports like beer league, like it could be little things as stick handling every day. You could also watch YouTube videos and remind yourself of positioning and making sure you're in the right spot. In business, right, we should drill and do things just the same as sport and athlete players do. You should work at things, again, come even every hour, right? I know one time suck that most businesses have these days is email, right? So all of a sudden we get sucked into our email. We have to remind ourselves, all right, we got to shut this down and go back to productive week or productive activities. We just have to fight the unproductive work and stick to the process and gain results, right? With this process, you will definitely won't outwork yourself and to a point where a heart attack is in the foreseeable future, and you'll definitely achieve more.